giving you some time for the rest of your day. Anna will start recording this session so that we'll be able to send it to those participating as well as send it to others in our various networks. Please use the chat tool to ask questions. Anna will be monitoring that throughout the presentation, and she will jump in and ask the speakers any questions that you might have. Like I said, please feel free to ask any questions throughout the presentation. Let me give a quick summary before I introduce our guest speakers. How to realize your company's vision is what we're going to talk about today. Interestingly enough, I found out that from Kelly and Harry that top consulting firms report that about 70% of all strategic execution in organizations fails. They believe it doesn't have to be that way, and they're going to talk more about that today. This will be an interesting discussion and dialogue focusing on strategic execution, and in particular, three key components: alignment, engagement, and innovation. And I'm anxious to hear what Kelly and Harry have to say about that. Some takeaways from this, I think, will be sort of an understanding of why strategic execution fails. What's needed to innovate in organizations these days, what meaningful engagement can mean to strategic execution and accomplishment of goals, and then aligning of priorities, how that actually happens and how it's actually necessary more than ever. And then three key questions, which I'm anxious to find out what they are. We'll get to that at some point during the presentation, and I have my notes to make sure that I don't let that one slip by because I want to know what those questions are. Let me introduce our speakers, and then we will get to our panel discussion. I'll moderate. My name is Mark Izzo. I am the principal and founder of Converge HR Solutions. We're located in Berwyn, Pennsylvania. We've been around since 2006. We provide HR outsourcing and consulting work, as well as recruitment process outsourcing to companies that are in a small to mid-sized market. Our geographic footprint goes from New York currently down to Florida. And we work with clients in all industries on these various HR issues that companies are facing these days. Let me introduce Kelly Stewart first. Kelly is the founder of the Positive Business, improving strategic implementation by helping align actions to outcomes through generative conversation. She designs and facilitates strategic conversations for business leaders who want to move their organizations forward in proactive and positive ways. She has leadership experience in client services, new business development, and marketing in the B2B space, and K-12 education. She's a co-host of the Doing Good Business podcast and frequently hosts on Money Matters TV. Today, Kelly works with small and mid-sized B2B businesses and nonprofit organizations, designing and facilitating strategic conversations to talk about what's possible based on what works. A proven effective approach based in part on a simple truth: people commit to what they help create. Kelly's a certified conversations worth having trainer, teaching people to improve their inner dialogue, how they communicate with one another, and how to think strategically, because better results really do begin with better conversations. Welcome, Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Sure. And now Harry Mumma is the founder of Gradum Consulting. Gradum Consulting offers financial operations support and IT solutions for small and mid-sized businesses. Harry helps create more efficient processes, provides fractional financial executive services, and helps manage large projects. Gradum specializes in the acquisition and integration, systems implementation, and work with companies to evaluate their financials and streamline processes for maximum value. Harry brings over 30 years experience as a financial leader, chief information officer to his clients in financial services, life sciences, manufacturing, and professional services industries. For the past 5 years, his clients have been startups, private equity portfolios, and public companies. Welcome, Harry.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.
Look forward to jumping into the dialogue now. And so I'm going to begin with asking some questions, and then we will engage in a moderated discussion. So let me jump right in. We talked about the name or the presentation of the summary. The summary of the presentation is how to realize your company's vision. So let's start with vision. All right. So Kelly, let's define vision just to begin with, if you would.
Sure. The vision is really the overarching long-range plan. It's where the leader or leaders of the organization see the organization going, the type of impact they're going to make in the industry that they're in, or the novel, innovative product or service they're bringing to the market. So there's a long-term vision. Think of it mostly as a ship's captain, right? We are here today and we are going there. So there's an overarching plan that is really meant to guide the organization throughout its strategy development and throughout its strategic implementation.
Great, great. As a follow-up, Harry, companies talk a lot about vision. I know my firm is talking about it, and a lot of my clients are talking about it. We're working on it as we look at our strategic plan for the remainder of this year and going forward into 2022. So companies spend a lot of intellectual capital talking about vision. Why is it so important?
Yeah, well, good question, Mark. Well, because without a vision, you don't have a destination. So, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. But if you know where you're going and you know where you want to go, then you need to have a plan to get there. And then you need to monitor as you're going into that, as you're trying to achieve that destination or vision, to make sure that you're still on the proper course. Kelly mentioned the ship's captain will set the destination. Well, the navigation officer, while not steering the ship, makes sure that the ship stays on the proper course and gets to the destination in the most effective and efficient way.
Great. Thank you. So, well, Kelly, let me ask you this question. We also talk in the summary of the presentation about strategic execution, right? And we use that term several times. Where does strategy take place in an organization?
Excellent question, Mark. Thank you. A strategy is actually nested within an organization. And so it is taking place at every level of the organization, and it is taking place even outside of the organization. So what I mean by that are strategic decisions, conversations, and actions are happening formally and informally every day. And that happens amongst employees. It also happens amongst vendors and suppliers, sometimes, and even the community members. And they're not always the strategic conversations, actions, and decisions that the business leaders want to have happen, but they are being made. And that can show up in a supplier who talks to another supplier and says, oh no, don't work with them. We do. It's a nightmare, right? That is not really a strategic conversation that a business leader has, yet it impacts the company's ability to do what they do well. So if that's the word out on the street, strategically, right, it's going to limit who you're going to have behind you, who's helping you develop and deliver the products and services that you have. And it could very well be employees. We have all of this transparency. So there are informal conversations happening not only inside the organization, but on things like Facebook, just amongst friends. Oh, they're hiring. Oh, don't apply, right? That's a strategic conversation. It's just not going in the way that the organization wants it to. And so I think it's important to understand that people who have not necessarily been considered as integral to part of the strategic planning are very much part of the strategic planning. They have valuable insights, they have information, and they have choices to make as to how much are they going to help you support and implement what it is you want to do.
So it's just not those sitting in the boardroom actually working on the strategic plan, right? It's the larger
Exactly.
community in the organization and around the organization.
Absolutely. Today in the information overload economy, in the knowledge economy that we work in, we want insights beyond the boardroom. And so the more that we can get those, the better off not only the strategy creation will be, but the strategic implementation.
Right. So collecting information from the typical C-suite executives is sort of an old school way of the way we used to do strategic planning, right? And now
Sure.
that data needs to come from the bottom up, from the top down, and from both sides.
Absolutely, right? It is a valid perspective. It is a necessary perspective, but it is now only one. And I think that's the big shift as we've seen over the last 20 some years now with the access to information that we all have, right? I would say we have so much data, we're drowning in information. But there was a time when the handful of people who were in the boardroom creating that strategy, they had the only available information, right? No one else had access to that. So it kind of made sense in a lot of ways, not completely, but it did, there was a real business case for it. But now today, I challenge one person, let alone six even, to keep up with the most accurate, the most up to date finger on the pulse, what's going on in our market, early and subtle market shifts. It's almost impossible for them to do that. So to have that one perspective, theirs, awesome, and add to that with the perspectives that other people can bring to that conversation.
Interesting. Harry, would you chime in here, please?
Yeah. Well, obviously, I agree with Kelly 100%. But you know, um, taking it a step further, I would say that if you're not getting the alignment of the entire organization around the strategy, you're not getting that engagement that you're looking for. If I don't have, if I'm not listened to, I'm not going to be as engaged as if I am listened to. So I think it's more important than ever for the people in the boardroom and the people in the C-suite to incorporate everybody into that strategy. Number one, you'll get better engagement. Number two, you'll be ensured that you're aligned. And C, you may get a point of view that you didn't have. Especially using Kelly's example of 30 years ago. 30 years ago, boardrooms were mostly old white men. Today's boardrooms are much more diverse. You get a much more diverse opinions, diverse ideas, diverse thoughts, and by going down the organization as well, you'll also get that diversity and those unique outlooks.
If I may, just to add, I call them
Please.
the exquisite details, right? Because there are exquisite details that can surface during conversations that, as a leader who, especially an established leader who has been taught to have all the answers, right? You might be in the ballpark of where that answer is, but it's exactly in what Harry was saying. Having a conversation with someone else is going to give some type of a specific insight, the exquisite detail, right? That, oh, yes, that's what we were looking for. There's something in that subtlety that can often be the game changer in either inspiring people to become part of the strategy, unlike 30 years ago where you were kind of enrolled in the strategy. Like, what we want you to do, right? Wink, wink. And if you don't, there's the door. So I wasn't really saying, hey, I'm excited about this and I want to be part of this strategy. Today you are. Today you are really inspiring people to get on board with you and go in the direction towards that vision. So I think when we can get those exquisite details, sometimes that's just what you needed, right? It's just that subtlety that makes all the difference in the world, can ignite it really in ways that would not have happened before.
Good conversation. I definitely want to talk about alignment, engagement, and innovation. But before we do, I want to throw this out there because the opening, we talked about top consulting firms indicating that reporting that 70% of strategic execution fails. Personally, I've read many a book on this. I think you could fill a small library with leadership books written on failed execution, right? And I want to know why. So let's start with Harry. Why we build these plans, and why do we fail to execute? What's the root cause or causes of the failure?
Yeah, well, I don't think we're going to surprise anybody here by saying that employees aren't engaged, the strategy isn't aligned, and you're not innovating. I mean, that's you know, that's the underlying reason why strategies fail. We can talk about each one of them and how, and turn it around to how can you get, your employees engaged? How can you get that alignment, and how can you innovate? Not only that, Mark, but nobody's measuring that progress. If your strategy is to double your sales in 18 months, then somebody has to be measuring how each month, where are sales today? Are we on track? What's the plan to do that? Is everybody bought into the plan? But and I go back to, if you're not measuring and you're not, you don't have that navigation officer, that one person who's responsible for monitoring and measuring, then you're never going to get there. It goes back to, you don't know if you're on course. You don't know if you're on track to reach that vision.
Kelly, I'd like your take on strategic execution failing and
Sure.
why.
Thank you. Well, as part of the Mutual Admiration Society with Harry Mama, I agree with all of the things that he was saying. I also think, another familiar refrain is lack of resources, right? And so that's an easy one to point to. When the strategy has failed as part of the postmortem, it's very easy to say we just didn't have the resources we needed. And I would challenge people to test that assumption, because I've been involved in a lot of strategic planning, and almost all of these conversations, one of those exquisite details, something comes up like, oh yeah, well, we have the software that we're paying for, but we haven't used it in like a year and a half. Okay, maybe we should turn off that software and we could reallocate that resource to what we're doing. So there's always some type of untapped resource in the organization, or something that's just been overlooked that actually could have funded part of this. Sometimes the resources are not what we think they are. There are people who think, oh, you need the big budget for that. Hey, I'm a big advocate of the grassroots campaign, right? Things can be done, especially if you are in an organization where you've got a really active, loyal client base, right? Okay, then this is great, right? You can do a grassroots campaign with them and let them become your advocates and help nurture that relationship. So I think lack of resources is often cited. I challenge people to think, are they really? Are you sure you don't have the resources? And then I think one of the other things too, and it'll probably lead into our conversation on innovation, is you have to kind of go back to basics. Are you creating real value for people? So not only in what you're offering to your clients, who are but one set of stakeholders, one group of people who are essential to your company's success, but for your employees, for your suppliers. Are you creating real value in those relationships so that they want to be involved in what they're doing, in what you're doing, what you want to accomplish? And that doesn't have to be a huge endeavor, right? It just has to be meaningful to people. It has to be useful to them in some way. And then the last thing too, I think, is untested assumptions. So that goes back to, well, we thought it was going to go this way. And listen, I understand we can't predict the future. And if the last 18 months has shown us anything, it's just kind of reinforced that for me. So I know we can't predict the future, but we can set ourselves up for the best possibility for success. And we do need to test some assumptions. Where it used to be, you felt like you had some institutional knowledge that was good for several years. Well, you could put such a timer on that one, because it might only be 6 months now, and you have to get back out there and test that assumption. So I think those are a couple of other things that also lead to a stalled, or just the strategy isn't going anywhere.
Excuse me.
And if I can add on to what Kelly said,
Please.
Resources is not necessarily people. It's not necessarily money. It could be time. You know, you could drag it out longer. It could be software. It could be tools. You know, think about how many large companies today started in the founder's basement. Okay, they didn't have a ton of resources. You know, Jeff Bezos started Amazon in his garage. Okay, he wasn't a multi-billionaire when he started it. He is today. So, you know, just because you don't have a ton of people and a ton of money doesn't mean that you can't execute your vision. Just the opposite. I would build your vision and your plan to achieve it, knowing that, like Kelly said, the grassroots campaign. You know, a good example of that is crowdsourcing these days. Okay, think about what crowdsourcing does. It solves the money problem. It also develops a proof of concept and markets it all at once. And you know, look at the Ring doorbell. Those guys did it through crowdsourcing, got on Shark Tank, sold it to Amazon for billions. So you don't necessarily need a ton of money and a ton of people. You need resources. And I think those could be tools, it could be effort, it could be time.
Understood. Let me ask you a generic question about strategic planning before we start talking more about alignment and engagement and innovation. The strategic planning, well, let me just ask the question and ask our experts to jump in here, and that is, what is the ideal length of a strategic plan these days?
Excellent question. Harry, do you want to go first?
I think you should have a continuous strategic plan. I mean, you know, when you're driving across the country, if you're driving from the greater Philadelphia area where I'm located to California, I'm not just saying I have to get to California. I'm saying I have to, you know, go west through Pittsburgh, and then and so I'm always checking in on that plan. I'm one for continuous monitoring. So, you know where you want to get to, but you've got to continually monitor to make sure that you're making progress against it. Not only that, but once you get there, you got to have the plan for what's next. Just getting to California is great, but, you know, do you want to go to Hollywood? Do you want to go to San Francisco? Do you want to do this? You know, you got to plan afterwards. So I'd say the length of the plan is as long as you're willing to commit, but you should always be constantly monitoring against that plan.
Kelly?
Agreed. I think for those that need a number, 3 years would be the outlier for me because so much is changing. So you can have that 3 years, and then I think you need exactly what Harry was saying, some objectives in that and key results, so that you're monitoring them a little bit more frequently so that you can retool. So I think that's one part of it. And Google kind of has recently popularized these OKRs, objectives and key results. And there's been a lot of people who are using them and using them effectively. They break it down by quarter. It's a really nice, simplistic, like it's a simplified way of doing things to help keep you on track, because that's another tool. Right? We want to help people stay on track. And when we deliver reams of paper and Gantt charts and processes, right, it's harder then to stay on track. So you need something that can simplify it for people. So I do think that that's a big part of it, is just to say, where are we going? And when organizations really embrace and value that strategy is happening, as we talked earlier, at every level of the organization, and when they invest in helping people think more strategically, have more strategic conversations, then they're better able to do what I love, which is, you know, plan tight and hang loose. They're able to weather those storms that might come out of nowhere, since we're using the boating analogy, right? You know, it wasn't on the radar, and here comes that storm that's going to come in and blow us upside down for a little bit. But they're better able to not only be resilient during that time, but then also bounce forward, right? So they can bounce back from whatever happened, and then they can bounce forward in a way that's still strategic.
Yeah, and adding one more onto what Kelly just said, you know, think about the strategic plans that were put in place in 2018 and 2019, the 3 and 5 year plans, and then ask those companies, what happened to it in July when they analyzed it in July 2020 in the middle of the pandemic. Again, you have to know where you're going, but you always, and I keep reinforcing, you got to keep monitoring, because I'm sure a lot of business plans went out the window in March of 2020, and companies just struggled to survive, and that can be your plan. Your plan could be just survival during a downtime.
And the opposite can happen. There were many companies for whom demand went through the roof, and they weren't necessarily prepared for that. It wasn't part of their strategic plan. There are software programs that, you think about companies that started making the PPE materials that went through the roof. They weren't planning for that, so there's another part, and that is my side of it, I guess, is I would say, hey, plan for the positive too, right? You can be surprised and delighted, not always surprised and disappointed.
Yeah, I mean, just piggybacking what Kelly just said, Zoom meetings has become the Band-Aid or Kleenex or the Google. It's now, even though you're on a Teams meeting or a GoTo meeting or whatever, you say, I'll Zoom you. And, Zoom was prepared for that positive, and they took off, and, they're as we're sitting on Teams, I guess I shouldn't say they're the leader. But
Right. That's right. Yeah. Good discussion though, about length of planning cycle, and then check-ins and monitoring key results, and then being able to retool like we have over the last 18 months, either to the negative side because we have to downsize and we have to figure out how we stay afloat, or to the upside like Carrie was just talking about, and Kelly, regarding a Zoom or some of these organizations that built PPE and retooled their whole factory to be able to come up and start making hand sanitizer and so forth. You probably read all this stuff. So these are organizations that I would describe them as being strategically nimble in order to be able to do such a thing. Want to talk about alignment. So Harry, I know you have a deep and long history in finance, and so everybody gets a copy of the budget, right? The departments the management hands out the budget to everybody. So doesn't that align us? We know what we're allowed to spend. We know what we're supposed to generate in revenue. We're aligned, right? Is that correct?
You would like to think that, Mark, but more often than not, I've seen it's not the case. The budget comes out and it's set at the top, and then each individual department gets their departmental budget, but they don't see how they fit in to the overall picture. It's that that top-down command, what I call the old way of doing business, that needs to change. That's why you need to get everybody in the room. You need a department that's a cost center to understand what the entire organization is trying to achieve. If I'm a cost center, if I'm not generating revenue, but the underlying budget, the underlying vision is to grow sales, to double sales, I don't see that. So I may be cutting more than I should be, and therefore the company can't reach its goal because, I'm cutting because that's it. I'm a cost center, and that's all I know about. As you've heard Kelly and I talk about a lot, you can't cut your way to profitability. And so, you need that alignment across the board. And not only that, but I got to tell you, Mark, I've done a couple of risk assessments where, in a risk assessment, you're saying, here are the company's objectives. What are the risks to achieving them? If you start with the top and the CEO says it's the double profits in the next 18 months, and then you go to a manager and he says it's the cut costs or it's the drive down costs, they're not aligned. Mm-hmm. And so they're not going to see it. if you're a bigger company with divisions, if it's the double sales, are all the divisions commissions built to double sales? Are they built, on gross sales, or are they built on gross margin? If you can do it on gross sales, but then are you really aligned? And it's kind of like the old Pan Am model. They used to lose $500 a flight, so they said, well, we'll fly more flights. Well, okay, that's a good way of losing money, but it's not a good way of doing business, and that's why they're not around today. So, yeah, just getting a copy of the budget doesn't align you unless, as Kelly said before, you were in that budget meeting helping to prepare it.
Mhm.
And then not only are you aligned, but you're probably a little bit more engaged because you had a say in where you're going versus, just being handed orders and expected to follow them.
And you might not have gotten the money that you wanted in that budget, but if you've been in that room, you understand why it went to where it went and how that fit into the bigger picture, which are often messages that don't translate throughout the organization.
Right. I guess an easy measurement of alignment would simply be to walk around the factory floor or walk around the office and start to ask employees toiling away at their cubicles or in their office, what are we trying to accomplish? What are we trying to achieve this year? What's the company's goals, financial goals, and not only financial goals, but strategic other goals in terms of people and culture, or in terms of clients, in terms of internal processes and systems, sort of the old balanced scorecard model, right? Do you know what those are? And then you'll be able to tell if people are aligned or not, right?
Right.
And a perfect example of that, if anybody's ever seen the TV show Undercover Boss, it's a education on how CEOs have no idea what's going on and that they need to walk around. Some of the best organizations are where the CEO is walking around. You don't have to know everybody's name, and if you have thousands of employees, you won't know everybody's name, but at least you're going to get that feedback, that grassroots level that Kelly keeps talking about.
Right.
Kelly turned me on to a book called Maverick, where the CEO created a democracy where everybody got a say, and eventually, spoiler alert, moved himself out of a job because the company set the vision. They didn't need a CEO to set the vision. So why pay a CEO the amount you need to pay them when the company is setting that direction? Novel concept. It worked, very unique. May not be for everybody, but it shows why you need to go down to the grassroots and make sure that everybody has bought into the plan.
And I'm not a researcher, and I don't pretend to be one even on this presentation, but I would suggest that there is at least a correlation, if not a causal relationship, between alignment and leadership, because it's got to come. And this is what Harry has been describing, and in walking around, getting to know people and talking, if the leaders of the organization don't genuinely, and that's a word that cannot be understated, don't genuinely desire alignment, which is often done through engagement, then it's not going to happen, right? Because we're all fairly good at individuals as kind of getting that sense of, they don't really care about us. They don't really like, they just, they're saying the right things, but they just want to know, how many widgets did I produce today? Or am I on track with my sales goals? And that can be really fleshed out. We're really good at humans is doing that. But if there's a genuine desire, then things like that are described in the book Maverick that he did, you start to put some of those really like kind of novel things in place. They're interesting, and you try it, and you do, like, the risk word, right, doesn't become such a dirty word as it is it's a gauge of where are we on the innovation scale, right? So you can put parameters around that where you're not going to take the ship down, but you have to step out a little bit from your comfort zone. if you can do it in ways that feel like natural next steps, and again, this goes back to the leadership, right? If you can do that in ways that feel like a natural next step, then you're going to be much better off to have that alignment in your organization.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off that, the genuine is cannot be emphasized enough. I worked for an organization back earlier in my career where the CEO must have gotten feedback from somebody that he should have had lunches with, team members. And he did. He brought them in and 5 at a time and had lunch with them. But you know what? He didn't listen to them. He didn't hear them. He interacted, but you could tell he wasn't present in the room, looked at his watch all the time. Because of that, I mean, employee turnover went through the roof. The company ultimately, I ended up leaving as well. And, it's got to be genuine. And especially today, in today's environment, you got to hear your employees. You've got to hear their concerns. The culture is changing so quickly that you have to change with it and ensure that you're leading your employees as you're changing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great segue to the concept of engagement, right? So you teed that up well, Harry. I didn't know if you knew you did that or not, but good job. Made my life easier. So let's talk about engagement. We know I'm a big Gallup fan and have studied this for many, many years and have used engagement surveys with our clients in a number of different industries. And we all know that in round numbers, it's about 30% of people in the workforce are engaged, which means 70% are not. And that usually is about 50% are sort of disengaged, and the other 20% are actively disengaged, which are basically means that they're undermining your operational efficiency in your organization and so forth. So broad view of the numbers, call it, 30% engaged, 70% not engaged. Tell me why. Kelly, you want to start?
I would love to start. Thank you, Mark. Yes, because again, not a researcher, but it does pass my test of reasonableness. So thank you for sharing. You teed up those numbers beautifully. So if 70% of strategic execution fails, that means that 30% of it succeeds. And if in round numbers, 30% of employees are engaged, then it passes my test of reasonableness and maybe others that they're helping to drive the 30% of strategic execution that succeeds. And so I think that's a big part of it, that there is a relationship between those numbers. And I also feel that what you talked about, I always think of that engagement on a bell curve. And so again, thank you for sharing those numbers. So you've got the 30% who are actively engaged, 25% actively disengaged. That's going to happen, right? You can't be everyone's cup of tea. And sometimes it just doesn't work. And many times they'll self-select out when the organization is moving forward because they just don't feel comfortable. It's not good for them. So they'll find some place where they are comfortable and where they can thrive. But in the middle of that bell curve are all of those people who are wanting and waiting to be engaged. And so how do you bring them into these conversations? Because it's not necessarily comfortable for them either, just as much as it is for an established leader who was, has successfully drawn on the principles of this hierarchical relationship where it's like, I'm supposed to have all the answers and I'm supposed to tell you what to do. And then I'm supposed to chide you when it doesn't happen and give you some kind of stick motivation for doing better. Well, for the employees, it's not always easy for them to share their input. They don't necessarily feel that they're either valued, or they don't feel that they have the right communication skills for sharing that, or they don't understand the greater context in what they do every day has such an impact on the strategic execution. Because again, going back to hierarchical, but it's definitely in command and control, that chain of command isolated people from one another. And while that has definitely started to change over the last 10 years, I'll be generous with that, 10, 15 years, right? There are still a lot of vestiges of the old ways left in our operations. So people don't always know what the other hand is doing. And that is not only in a large organization. That can very much be in a smaller organization where everybody's just taught, just go fend for yourself, right? Like, oh, don't bring us your problems. We only want to hear about the case studies. You figure it out. I work for a company like that. There's your office. Go figure it out. And so, you know, it's important then to give them the tools, not only the tools, but the environment. Again, going back to leadership, that genuine environment where it's every idea is a good idea. We want your thoughts, right? We're going to blue sky this, blue ocean, however you want to think about it, get in your helicopter, look down, right? Because at that point, you're only talking about what might be possible. So if we can reduce the fear, the potential fear that, oh, I'm going to be made fun of, or, you know, it's just my boss is going to think I'm not smart or something like that, then we can get them to really open up. And that word might is so mighty and powerful because it implies there is no right or wrong answer to this. There's no yes or no. There's no binary response. What might be possible if we took 20% of what you're doing and gave that to another department? Oh, well, in that time, I could 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Here come the exquisite details, because this is what this person's been holding on to. Maybe they're going home and telling their family about it, you know, maybe they're thinking about it in the shower, but they don't feel that they have that pathway to actually talk to people, which brings the conversation, you know, back into focus again, and that genuine commitment to really understand what is going on here. And exercise as a leader, exercise your own emotional intelligence, right? We're taught a lot, we're hearing a lot about authenticity and transparency and empathy and trust, right? But how do we do those things? Well, having these types of conversations is a great way to flex some of those muscles and learn from them.
Excellent. Harry.
Yeah. Obviously, I agree with Kelly, but, you know, a couple things that I would add is, you know, a true leader will inspire their employees to participate, not mandate participation. You can't mandate genuine participation, or you can't mandate engagement. You have to facilitate it, foster it, inspire it, whatever the word is you want to use, but you've got to create the culture. And you have to, you know, you as a leader defines the culture, but the organization should live the culture. Everybody should know, here are our core values, and here's how we live them on a daily basis. You know, one of the things that Kelly and I commiserate on is when you walk into a company and their core values are on the wall, but nobody is listening that are doing them. Nobody is living them. Nobody is demonstrating them. Nobody can recite them. You know, employees who are engaged in the culture will be engaged in the overall success. You know, one of the most remarkable things I saw early in my career was going down and doing work at DuPont and hearing the employees love their job. You know, they would brag, I've been here 35 years. That's because back then that was the culture, and the culture was, you know, a part of them. We spend a lot of time at work. It should be more than just the number of widgets that you do. You know, you should reward your employees, not just with a participation trophy, but real rewards. On the other hand, you also have to hold them accountable. You know, one of the things that has always frustrated me is these 2% across the board merit increases. How do you foster accountability when everybody gets the same, whether they're excellent employee, a key performer, or just somebody who's, you know, barely hanging on? So, you know, there are ways. The carrot and stick absolutely can work, but you have to live it. It has to be real, and the employees have to gain it and buy in. And you as a leader have to inspire that.
Good answer. Thank you. And good discussion. Back to the numbers for a moment before we jump into the concept of innovation, and that is that 50% in the middle on the bell curve, as Kelly described. I often talk to employers about that there are two things that can happen to that group. One is they can and this is the ideal, move into the engaged employee section, if you will, right? Or that category of people, or they can go the other way. They can go to the actively disengaged, right? And so it's really critical that we spend our time, obviously, with those who are engaged, but those that are in the middle, and that we live it and breathe it and help them understand it and engage them at a level where they move into the 30% category, right? So I just wonder of your thoughts. Am I oversimplifying that? And I've been talking about this for years, saying they can go up or they can go down.
Right.
But I really wonder how much employers are really focused on that group and helping them to really gain that level of engagement. I'd like your thoughts.
If you don't mind, I'm going to jump in on this one because Harry started to touch on it too, is that for reasons I can't quite figure out. So if someone does understand this, please let me know. We do tend to obsess on what's broken or what's missing. And I know the brain science part of that, right? I know that that's because we've got a part of our brain that says, hey, I need to keep you safe. And I'm just going to always be on looking for anything that could take us down, right? Thank you, because you're going to stop me from walking into traffic without looking both ways. The problem is that when we devote so much of our time to that kind of critical, what's deficit thinking, right? What's missing, what's broken, it has almost consumed us. And Harry brought that up too. Like, there are things that are going really well, and we don't examine that to say, why is that going really well, right? And in the surveys, you talked about employee surveys earlier, and my mind always goes to, think about a time that a colleague or a client said thank you to you. What was going on then? Like, let's understand that more than we understand what's broken or what's missing, because we can replicate that as a formula for success. And I think that's what happens with the people in the middle of the bell curve. They kind of get forgotten. So I'm definitely now also in your mutual admiration society, because they get forgotten, and there's no one studying that or putting some thought into, genuinely, it's our word of the day, right? How can we genuinely help move those people into the engaged environment? What's going on in their day-to-day? What's going on that's working well for them, comma, that we can build upon? And that's how you start to build trust, right? And that's how you start to be comfortable as a leader being transparent, because you genuinely want to help move them into this engaged portion of the bell curve, right? And there's a responsibility to that, right? So it is about, this is how, thinking we're going to have a plan. We've talked about strategic plans, and I don't want to leave everyone with the impression that we are only talking about the large strategic planning plan, right? We are also talking about any strategy that takes place, a compensation strategy, right? A facility strategy. There's so much that goes into this that they don't all have to be large strategies. And so for a business leader, you could very much have an engagement strategy. You can put it down on your own OKRs, right? This is my goal for the next quarter. I'm going to learn. I'm going to ask good questions. I'm going to observe what's going on with the people who I feel like, geez, they're on the tipping point. When do I see them excited? What's happening when I see them excited? When are they laughing, right? When are they sharing an idea? What was happening in the room when they shared that idea? Who was in the room? What were we talking about? How were they responded to? So these are all things then that become part of the formula for success. So I highly, heartily encourage an examination of that. What is going on there? And when it's working well, what's going on, and how can we create more of that?
Yeah, and just piggybacking off that, Kelly brought up a great point. We've been talking strategic plans, and I've been using examples of, revenue and profit, but in every plan, every objective that I had put together when I was in corporate America, I had, training, I had turnover, I had built into, I called them KPIs, they could be called benchmarks, whatever. But I had for every, I was a head of internal audit. Nobody wanted to be an internal audit. So, but one of my KPIs was for every person who left externally, I had to promote 2 people internally. I had training, figures that everybody had to have. I did 360 or 180 feedback. You know, I had my employees assess me. And you know, I always knew when someone was going to leave because I had 17 people reporting to me. I'd get 16 4s and 5s and 1 2, and I was like, "Yep, well, it's about time for somebody to leave." But you know, and when people see that and they see that you're genuine about that, because when I got bad reviews from my team, I would sit down and talk to them about it. Here's what I'm going to do. I've heard you. I'm going to change. I've been and now taking it into what I'm doing today with Gradle. You know, I see a lot of startups that start at 4 or 5 employees, and then they get to 50, and in that 30 to 50 range, the leader who was good at 30 starts to fall apart at 50, and the reason is, Mark, because now they've got employees in the bell curve. It's easy when you don't have anybody in the bell curve. You know, it's easy to keep everybody engaged when you see them and you're all huddled in a garage or an office or whatever. But especially now that you can't walk up the halls, you know, or as you get bigger and you have more locations, you know, you can't visit. You have to have a plan to keep your employees engaged. And everybody has to know that plan. Everybody has to be aligned on that plan. So, you know, bringing the alignment and the engagement together.
And there are some assumptions to test there too, right? Because people are diverse, and the more diverse your team is, what might motivate them, how they might learn, all of these things are different, right? How they might communicate as part of their jobs, let alone in reporting to you, but just how they might communicate with others. There's, you know, like just a treasure trove of ways to engage people. And again, I think we tend to have a tendency to try to use this one size fits all. And I'm like, why? Like, wait, let me check. It's 2021, right? You know, so I think that it does get harder as it scales, if that's the way you think about it. Or you could think, oh, okay, it's scaling. I need different tools. And hence, here comes one of those mini strategic plans that we're talking about. You still need to put a plan around it. Still go talk to other people. Talk to maybe people who hold lateral positions, you know, kind of your counterparts. What are you doing in your team? Talk to some employees, maybe talk to some of the people who left before you even came on board. Why did you leave? What was going on? There's so much that you can do when you choose to focus on that.
Yeah, and we should move on to the topic of innovation. I want to ask some questions around that, but I'll say purely from a pure HR standpoint, that 20% of disengaged employees, managers spend 80% of their time thinking about those and not thinking about the people in the middle of the bell curve and not necessarily praising and rewarding those that are actively engaged. We spend our time chasing the 20% that are disengaged. And from a pure HR standpoint, and I apologize in advance for saying this, you should move rapidly to remove those people from the organization and replace them with folks that are more engaged. But that's, again, just my HR spidey senses talking.
No, I back that up because I think it's better for everyone. Those people are not comfortable in the organization for it. It's just not a good fit, and it's unrealistic to expect that every person will be. So they will thrive more when they find the organization that they're better suited for. And the rest, you and your team and your organization will thrive more when you have other people who see the bigger vision and see their part in it and can take that self-directed action.
Yeah, well, so help them leave and don't spend so much time obsessing about it.
Exactly.
Right. And being the finance guy, you know, one of my favorite cartoons or sayings that I keep seeing is the CEO and CFO of a company talking, and the CEO saying, you know, what happens if we put all this money into our employees and then they end up leaving? And the CFO says, what happens if we don't and they stay? So, you know, you've got to think about that. You know, invest in your employees because you want to keep them, but also they have to have a plan too. Each employee, I mean, we all have a sense of self. And if I don't, and again, I spend most of my time at work. So if I can't express myself or better myself, I'm just rotting. And nobody, I mean, you can't do 30 years of that. You're going to get fed up and leave. And especially in today's job market where, there are plenty of jobs out there. And so the employers who are going to be successful are those who are genuinely listening to their employees.
Excellent. Great discussion. Let's talk about innovation for a moment. And let me start with you, Harry. So talking about innovation, what if a company feels they have a great product or service, but it's not selling, it's not working, something's not clicking? What are your thoughts on that as it relates to innovation?
Thank you, Mark. Yeah. As I was preparing for this, one of the things I found is, what does innovation mean? And if you actually look it up online, it says innovation is the process is to innovate. And I was like, okay, that makes no sense. So I went even deeper. And every company has to have their definition of what is innovation. Is it a new product? Is it an unmet customer need? I mean, think about it. Zoom was around. They didn't innovate. They just met a critical need at the right time. The PPE people that Kelly mentioned before, they didn't innovate anything. They just met a need. Or is it creating a new market? Is it excelling in an existing market? One of my favorite examples is the Blockbuster Netflix story. Blockbuster or Netflix didn't create a new market. They just excelled in video rentals. And one of my favorite stories is in September of 2000, Netflix went to Blockbuster and said, "Would you buy us for $50 million?" And Blockbuster laughed at them. Well, if you've watched the documentary, The Last Blockbuster, you know what happened. So, innovation is whatever makes you successful. And so to your point, we have a great product. Why isn't it selling? Well, it could be that the market hasn't bought into it. It's that you don't have the right strategy on it. I'll go back to another great example. I use Betamax versus VHS back in when we were still taping things and recording television. Everybody I've talked to and everything I've read, Betamax was a better product. They just didn't have the right strategy. And JVC said, open source technology, everybody can make one. Sony's like, we're going to keep it. Well, Betamax went the way of the dodo bird. So innovation is, to me, is either a new, it could be either a new product, meeting a customer need that hasn't been met, or just excelling in existing markets, or creating a brand new market. And so, you have to have a plan, an innovation plan, because you never know what's going to come around the corner. Again, it is 2021. We've been 20 months in a pandemic, or however long in a pandemic. If you don't have an innovation strategy, you're going to get left behind.
Mm-hmm.
Understood. Kelly, let me ask, it's an innovation question, just a little bit different take on it. What's working now in terms of activating people's most creative and determined thinking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's critical, right? Because we've already touched on it a little bit more, but when we are focused on the negative, like singularly focused on the negative, right? We have to know what the challenges are. We have to know, oh, there's a new entrant, right? Okay, how are we going to respond to this? But when we are singularly focused on that, what we do in terms of psychology and the brain science is we really suppress what the prefrontal cortex does. And I call that our plan and prepare mode, right? So everything, presumably, if you listen to LinkedIn or read business journals, that a leader would want, people who can be analytical, rational, who can forecast, who can be creative, who can be inspired, right? We're shutting all of that off when we're talking about that. Don't you understand? We need to innovate, which, by the way. I personally feel a lot of innovation is really just incremental improvement, masking as innovation. That's okay. It's still improvement, but it's not, to Harry's point, the elusive definition of innovation. And so you have to help people, and that's really done through language, right? And imagery, help them to get into their, we call it below the brain, above the brain. There's a line, think of, a line cutting your brain in half. So you want to get above the line. Sorry, I misspoke. So you want to get them from below the line, where we're skeptical and we're fearful and we're frustrated and we're angry because we don't know, how are we going to meet these deadlines? And I think I'm going to lose my job and all of that, to we want to get them to where they feel good about what they're doing. And lots of times humor comes into play, right? We start to relax people. We go out and have fun. This is the purpose of team building exercises, not for marketing, right? It's not only just to put, oh, look, we all went hatchet throwing and it's on our website, right? The purpose of team building is to build a team, and high performing teams have a 6-to-1 ratio of positive conversations to negative ones. So there's been a lot of research from actual researchers done on the subject, not me. And so when that happens, now you're activating the part of the brain that is more about thriving. It's more relaxed. It's not worried. There's another part of the brain that says, wait, look, there's something coming at you. So that's got to be quiet for a little while. And then we bring it up. Now we can get into the, what if we could? What would that look like? Or what if we mix this with that, right? What if instead of using a taxi cab, we just offered a service that people could use on their phones to bring, like, this is where you start to get into those really great ideas that, again, what might be possible. These are not give us your idea and your plan for execution, or because your job depends on it conversation. This is just the what might be possible. And so the more that we can help people get above that line in their brain, from the part that protects them to the part that keeps them thriving, then stand back. And there's something, the work that I do is based on something called Appreciative Inquiry, which has been around for a long time. And there's a book written on it, not by the person who really developed it, but by others have written about it. And there's one, and the tagline on it is about transformation at the speed of imagination, or change at the speed of imagination. And so just think about that for a second. Imagination, that's what we need, because necessity does fuel invention, but imagination fuels innovation. And it doesn't have to be big, earth-shattering innovation. One of my favorite stories to tell, Harry's a much better storyteller than I am, but one of my favorite stories, and I believe this is true, I would have to look it up, but I did read the book. Booker T. Washington wrote Up From Slavery, and in his mind, he felt that one of the single most important innovations was the toothbrush, because he was already 12 years old the first time he brushed his teeth. And he said that after he did that, he could not believe the confidence he felt in talking to other people, right? So it's something that we all take for granted. Has it been incrementally improved over the years? It sure has, right? But it is not the same as being completely innovated. And so maybe that's an opportunity for somebody listening to this presentation today, right? But think about the little things that you use. Because the key in that, and in his story, and I'll go back to what I said earlier, is it has to create real value for someone. It has to change their lives, improve their lives in ways that just already haven't existed. And then when you create real value, so much more of that just kind of appears. Now you have engaged employees because they feel good about what they do. Why? Because they're not getting constant phone calls complaining about how terrible it is, or we didn't see this in the fine print, or hey, it only works 90% of the time and that's not good enough for us, right? So they can get around something. They know they're creating real value. They see it in the ether, right? The chatter and social media is all good, and nobody's behind the scenes orchestrating that. That's really just that spontaneous word of mouth marketing. Everybody feels good about it. Customers tell other customers, more people are buying it. You're written up in the news. Harvard, Business Review wants to talk to you. These are all great things that help us to even fuel more of that creative thinking. And you mentioned determined thinking. And I think that's really important, because we don't all stay above the line in our brains. Life Circumstances, changes in the business environment, in our economy are going to bring other challenges. Not to worry. We will always have something that brings us below the line for a few minutes, makes us look at that and say, hey, that looks like a threat, but let's pull it apart. Is there an opportunity in here? And then we can start to get above the line again. And that's what it's about, right? It's not about staying above the line always and just coasting into the sunset. Well, there's no innovation in that. There's no interest in that. It is about saying, how can we be more resilient? And how can we have fun doing it? Because when we have fun doing it, we know we're helping to keep people in that right state of mind. And by state of mind, I mean plan and prepare mode.
Yeah, one of the things I think that's critical to innovation, and I've been reading a lot about it recently, is how Silicon Valley focuses on innovation, or at least surrounds, allows people the opportunity to fail. Mm-hmm. So if innovation is only about getting it right, we're destined for failure, right? I mean, we're not going to get it right all the time. Mm-hmm. Having an idea and having it flounder completely is okay, right? I mean, you need to build that bubble of safety so that people can operate above the line, as you indicated, and be creative and be innovative and so forth. And sometimes they're going to get it, and sometimes they don't. And that's the whole ethos of the technology world we live in.
Absolutely. And I'll say too, the words matter. So, for a while, the fail forward, right? Fail fast is what was out there. Oh, we fail fast. We fail fast. Mm. Words matter because your brain thinks in images before it ascribes words to it. So when it does that, it translates that to an image of failure. Failure trips that amygdala so that we start to get scared and frightened.
Sure.
So I would like everyone listening to this to say the next time they are thinking they're going to say, we need to fail fast, say, we're going to learn forward. So we're going to learn, but it's going to move us forward every time. We're going to learn something. We learned something here, but it's helped to move us forward. So that's
interesting.
Great
insight.
Yeah. So just real quickly, just to piggyback off of Kelly, two things. Number one, since I met Kelly, she has absolutely changed my thinking from the negative to the positive. When I first started grading, there was the terror of not working or not having work and everything, and that positive thinking. I didn't fail anymore. I learned. I didn't, I didn't do something wrong. I found out what didn't work and did things right. And the second thing, is Kelly mentioned fun, and I have this piece of paper on my desk, and I know you guys can't read it, but I will read it to you. Happiness once was told to me that it was the 4 F's: function, family and friends, or a sense of belonging, fun, and freedom. So when I'm sitting here in my office and I'm having a bad day, I look over at that piece of paper and say, which one of them am I missing? Sometimes it's fun, and I'll go take a break and do something not fun, but do something that picks me up a little. Or if it's freedom, I'll take my dog for a walk. Or if it's function, I'll switch to something that I'm really good at and do that for a half hour so I feel like I've accomplished something, that I'm not just running on that treadmill. And if it's family or friends or a sense of belonging, do some networking, help somebody who's in transition, call a family member you haven't seen in a while. And then that kind of picks you back up and you can sit down and get things done. You've heard about Google and the fun rooms and the ping pong and all this stuff. They've also innovated a lot. And that safe place. If you don't create a safe place for allowing not failure, but lack of success, people aren't going to want to try, and you're going to stay stagnant. Your people are going to play it safe, and you can't innovate in a defensive posture.
Harry, I think, right, you can't innovate if you can't experiment. You have to be able to experiment, right? And how did we lose that on our journeys?
Sure. So
I think I read once that Thomas Edison went through 100 different materials for the light bulb before he finally came up with the filament. You know, if he didn't accept failure and keep trying and have that sense, you know, obviously somebody would have invented it sometime, but he wouldn't be, you know, the guy that we all know today. So he didn't get
Right.
frustrated. He was in a safe spot and he kept trying.
Great discussion. We are coming up on the witching hour, and I have, there are two things that I'd like to accomplish if we could in the next 15 minutes that we have together. One is, one of the things we talked about from a learning perspective are three key questions that can be asked. So would you please discuss that with us?
Sure, absolutely. And these questions start where most things start, with our inner dialogue, right? So if you want to jumpstart your strategic planning process, in my experience, in my opinion, then I would encourage you to ask yourself these three questions. What do I really want that I really care about? When you have a vision of that, ask yourself this critical question: how good could that get? And let your imagination run wild with it. And then the third question is, how will I know that it's working, or that we're succeeding, that I'm achieving it? So what is it that I want that I really care about? And you could apply that to an organization. What do we really want that we really care about? How good could it get? And how will we know we're succeeding?
Excellent. I was vigorously writing as you spoke. I have captured those on a notepad on my desk. So thank you. I'd like to do one additional thing, and that is I'd like both for Harry and Kelly to tell our listeners and attendees about their businesses and themselves. We will also send out the details in terms of their website and their email address, etc., as well as send out the recording of this particular session. So, Kelly, would you mind going forward and giving us your summary of your business and contact information, please?
Sure. Okay, wonderful. I will probably forget the contact information, so if you can remind me, that would be great. I work with different types of organizations, not-for-profit, for-profit organizations also, that are looking to achieve something. They either feel a little stuck with the things that they've tried to do in the past and they're unsure why, or they have something they want to do, but they think it might be a little too much for the organization at the current time. And so what I do is I help them by using the Soar framework. So if you're familiar with SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, this is strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results. So I design and develop and then facilitate strategic conversations using the SOAR framework with them to develop either strategy or the plan. And part of that is then coming up, taking those opportunities, translating them into objectives and key results, the results also, so that they can get started implementing on that right away. We do involve stakeholders in that. So that would be board, staff, board in the case of the nonprofits, and staff, but also other external stakeholders. And that can be clients. If in the case of boards and nonprofits, sometimes it is donors, or if it's a school, it can be alumni. So we do bring all of those voices into the conversation, not necessarily in the room all at the same time, but that's what I help them with. And I also am certified in conversations worth having, which is one-to-one conversations and also strategic conversations. So I also offer boot camps where I can go in and train teams to have more productive, meaningful conversations with one another, and to have more strategic conversations. And I do that from my home headquarters in Delaware, but I work within the geographical area of Greater Philadelphia, but also through the power of Zoom or Teams or Google Meet. I can also deliver these services online, which of course I did a lot of during the pandemic.
Great. Can you give
my
us
contact information?
I was just going to remind you.
Thank you. So you can reach me at Kelly, and that's Kelly at thepositivebusiness.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm Kelly Stewart too, because the other Kelly Stewart, some other Kelly Stewart had beat me there. And of course, you can visit me at my website, thepositivebusiness.com.
Thank you, Kelly. Harry?
Yeah, so Harry Mama, Gradum Consulting is my company. Gradum is Latin for next level. And we help our clients get to the next level by strengthening their financial IQ, by providing financial operations in services such as fractional finance executive, streamlining AR, AP, cash management. In addition, we also do large project management, such as systems implementations and acquisition integrations. That's how we help our clients get to the next level. A lot of my clients started as startups and grew. My golden child is a company I started with in 2018. I was the 9th person in the door. They are 480 employees today through acquisitions and through growth. So, and I'm not saying I did that, but I've been along for the journey and I'm still with them. I've done, I started out getting them off of QuickBooks onto another platform. I've done 6 system implementations and acquisition integration and other projects with them. My contact information is harry.mumma, M-U-M-M-A, at Gradum, Gradum, consulting.com. On LinkedIn, I am Harry Mumma. I don't think there's another one. Well, my dad's also Harry Mumma, but he's not on LinkedIn. My clients are nationwide. I have one client that's international. So yeah, through the power of Zoom, and hopefully in 2022 we'll get to travel again. But I have a nationwide presence.
Well, thank you. Thank you both. I appreciate it. Thank
you.
Thank you to
and Mark, thank you for being a wonderful host and inviting us. I really enjoyed this.
My pleasure. It was a great discussion. I hope our attendees enjoyed it, and I'm sure those that we send our recording of this out to will enjoy it. And I appreciate everybody's time today, and we are just about out of time. So everyone have a great day, and